Everyone. I'm Judi Robinovitz, and I'd like to thank you for coming to Inside the College Admissions Office and learning more about how top colleges actually choose students. There are a number of downloads that I think will just give you some added information to supplement what I'm going to be saying this evening, reinforcing it as well. So when the webinar is over, if you just go to scorewebinar.com, you'll be able to download all of these handouts. So why are we doing this evening? Why is this so important? Not only has the number of students dramatically risen who are applying to college, but the whole admission process itself is truly a black box. And in fact, this comes from an Ivy League admission website, giving you an idea of just how non-transparent college admission really is. And while you're reading this, and I think it's important to read it, I have taken the liberty of highlighting a few things that I think are really important. It's telling you that you have to stand out. Yeah, we're going to tell you the same thing. It's a lot of little things. And when you ask what matters most, the answer is, well, everything matters. Just, pursue what you love and tell us about that. So I'm going to go into much more detail this evening. This was actually from the Yale website. So let's move forward and talk about what are the most important things that colleges are looking for and how they are making decisions. We'll start just by saying, these are active, engaged learners who are truly involved in their school and their community, who the colleges, are seeking, kids who don't give up, who have a thirst for learning. And of course, the more selective the university, the more important these characteristics are. So as we start to take a look inside a college admission office, and just to show you how dark a college admission, can really be, I went to the website to look for a picture of admission directors, counselors, mulling over applications and making decisions. And this was honestly the only picture I could find. And it is several years old. It is an actual picture. I believe it was Swarthmore University. But nonetheless, these are the 10 most important things. And I'd say for most colleges, they are in this order. There's a little bit of rearranging here and there, but for the most part, these are the most important things. And as you can think about it, this way before I get into the actual details of it, is if I could take a student's college application and let's say print it out. Of course, they're not printing anymore. They're doing everything by computer, but all the information taken together is probably somewhere between 12 and 15 pages, from the application to the essays to the resume, transcript, the recommendations, score report. And if you look at a typical admission officer and the work that she is going to do, like say that day or perhaps at home, in the evening, this is how high that stack of papers would be for just say one day's work for a college admission officer. So what that really means is that they're going to spend no more than 8 to 10 minutes reviewing each individual application. And there have to be things in that application that just sort of make the student jump off the page, that are just really special for an individual student, so that application will be memorable in this enormous stack of papers that are going to be read. So as you can probably imagine, the academic record carries the lion's share of the weight. And this is actually true even for a recruited athlete, because recruited athletes still have to maintain, meet, I'd say, almost the exact academic standards as a non-recruited athlete. Very, very, very close. In fact, one of my students was just told that she was meeting with the MIT, let me just say, one of the athletic coaches who was very interested in her, but he told her that she must have both AP Calculus and AP Physics, even if she wants to be an English major. So yes, the academic standards are important, for everyone. But let's go into what that really means. The rigorous curriculum, the strong grades, and an upward trend. What do we mean by the rigor of curriculum? So first of all, it's 5 core academic classes every year. So that means English, math, science, and social science includes history, government, economics, um, psychology, philosophy, those types of courses, and a world language. Those are the 5 cores. And sometimes when students start high school, counselors are a little bit reluctant to have them take 5 core subjects, even though there are 7 periods in the day. And of course, the other 2 periods are for electives or perhaps 1 elective in a study hall. But sometimes either counselors or parents are afraid that 5 cores could be overwhelming. You'd have to make up for it perhaps by sophomore year, or at least in 1 summer of getting that extra core subject in. So 5 core subjects every year minimum. The students who are getting into the more selective universities are often taking 6 cores and sometimes even more through online programs. So the colleges that are, selective and highly selective and super selective, are definitely looking, for honors and IB and AB. I would say that IB and AB tend to play a stronger role than ACE or dual enrollment, unless you're looking at a state university here in Florida. Our state universities do treat AP, IB, ACE dual enrollment equally, but once you're going out of state, ACE is not necessarily as widely recognized as AP and IB. And just give you a pointer about that. In a visit that I made to universities in California, when I visited USC, University of Southern California, and I met with a high-level admission counselor, one of the questions I asked was, how do you evaluate ACE courses? And her answer to me was, what's ACE? So I said, thank you, you've just answered my question. And when any of the University of California system schools like UCLA or Berkeley or Santa Barbara, there's 9 of them, but when they recalculate a GPA for an out-of-state student, the only bump you get is for AP and IB. You don't get a bump for honors, and you don't get a bump for ACE, and you don't get a bump for dual enrollment. So those things have to be kept in mind. But if you're looking at any of our 12 state universities here in Florida, they will treat the AP and IB and ACE and dual enrollment exactly the same in terms of, how much they add to the rigor. The more selective the college, the more years of the same foreign language they're looking for. And I would say that, 3 to 4 years is far preferable to 2 years. And if you've had your first year of foreign language in middle school, and many students do take something like Spanish 1 in middle school, they can do Spanish 2, 3, and 4, in high school the first 3 years. And it gives them the opportunity as a senior to either take AP Spanish, so the 5th year, or to pick up a different core. If you're going to drop a foreign language before that, after just 2 years, just know that it can hurt you when it comes to the highly selective universities. But of course, to hurt you less, you would replace it with another core. Okay, they want to see that you're passionate, about the courses that you're taking. They're going to know about that more from, say, the recommendations that you'll be asking for. At least one of your recommendations should be related to your major. So if I'm going in as a computer science major, I want a recommendation either from one of my AP computer science teachers or perhaps from a calculus teacher. If I'm going to be an engineering major, I'd like a recommendation from a math teacher and or perhaps physics or chemistry if I were doing, say, chemical engineering. Okay, it's also very important in looking at rigor that it matches your potential major in college. And what do I mean by that? If I'm applying as a business major, I really need to have calculus. Yes, there are some schools that will say you need to be calculus ready, which means you need to have gone through pre-calculus. But the more selective the university, the more that university is going to want to see 1 year of calculus at a minimum. And it's not unusual for really selective universities. And I'm not meaning the Ivies. When I say a highly selective university, it could be any university that has, say, under a 15% or 20% admit rate. And I will be showing you some admit rates as well. If I want to be an English major, I better have taken both years of AP English or IB. So if I say AP, please understand that I mean AP, or IB. But I want to be a psychology major. I better have had AP Psych. So there are things within your academics that will support your choice of major. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm going to say I want to major in linguistics, because I know colleges are always looking for linguistics majors, which is true for many colleges, because they don't get that many. It's not a highly popular major. But guess what? If you don't have several years of Latin and or Greek to justify being a linguistics major, they know that you're just trying to sort of game the system. So that rigorous curriculum is really the most important thing. And I'm often asked, is it better to have, a B in a regular subject or an A in an A, a B in an AP or an A in a regular? Of course, it's best to have the A in the AP, but it's definitely better to have the B in the AP than the A in the regular. Yes, that does mean it might lower your rank at a public high school, but the rigor of the curriculum trumps rank. Okay. Many colleges actually recalculate your GPA. The GPA that you see on your transcript is not the one that most colleges will use. And in fact, we have a website, recalculatemygpa.com, that will walk you through recalculating your GPA the way colleges do. Or one of the downloads is a Recalculate My GPA, and so you can do it on paper, and that also goes through how it's calculated. But I will tell you that if you go to a public school in South Florida, the weighted GPA that's on your transcript is going to be lower, is going to be higher than the recalculated GPA, and that's because our public schools tend to give much more weight than the colleges do. So after the academics come the SAT and the ACT scores. And I have much to say about that, because so much has changed since, the pandemic and post-pandemic, and how that impacts just the whole college admission process. Because as you know, early in the pandemic, virtually every college in America went test optional. Our state universities in Florida did not do that. I think we were very fortunate here in Florida that we weathered the pandemic better than they did in many other states, and our test centers mostly stayed open. But let's talk for a moment about, test optional and how that impacted admission decisions, because that has a major impact on how decisions are made still today. If a school is test optional, it made it much more competitive. And you may say, well, why? Well, that's because, let's just say that I've been a really good student. I've gotten, top grades. I have top rigor. Everything else about me, really shines, but I'm a lousy test taker. And when I took the SAT, after taking it 5 or 6 times, oh my God, I wasted so many Saturday mornings, I just got a 1200. Well, a 1200 these days is not going to get you into a highly selective college. I'm not going to send that. I'm going to apply anyway, because everything else looks really strong. However, my twin sister is a much better test taker than I am, and she had the same academic record and everything else exactly the same. But when she took the SAT, she had a 1570, and she only took it once. By the way, none of this is true, but I'm just giving you, examples that happen. So she submitted her scores. So what happened is that during the pandemic and all the test optional, schools out there, students who had low scores, like I did not submit. Students who had really high scores did submit. That has artificially inflated the mid 50% range of SAT or ACT scores for colleges that were test optional. And it made them more competitive, because today, if you're applying to a test optional school, are, you have to decide whether you're sending your scores or not. So you're sending them perhaps to some schools, but not all. We've recently changed our philosophy. We used to tell students during the pandemic, and even right after it, to submit if you're well within the mid 50% of last year's accepted students, like somewhere above the midpoint. So if the mid 50% was 1,200 to 1,400, we would tell students to submit if they were at the 1,300 mark or above. Okay. We feel differently now because we know that these scores are artificially inflated, and we're hoping colleges start, hoping that colleges are able to bring those mid 50% down to somewhere closer to pre-pandemic levels. Our advice to students is submit anywhere if you're within that mid 50% level. So even if I've got a 1220, I'm going to submit it. And even if I'm really close, if I have an 1180 or 1190, depending upon my math score and my reading writing score and what my potential major is, I still might submit. And I also think it's very important to consider your context, because if you're a student, let's say, whose native language is not English, but you live in a country other than the United States, but you know that your ACT score is higher than the mid 50% of your high school, or it's near the very top of your high school, and you can get that information from your counselor, you should submit, because your score is strong in context of who you are and where you go to school. So first of all, if you'd like to get a list of who's test optional and the different variations of test optional, test blind, test preferred, if you go to fairtest.org, that is a website that keeps up to date on college testing policies. But I'd like to show you that I don't think test optional is really test optional. And I know that there are many people in my position as doing college counseling who believe exactly the same thing. We think that there's definitely a test submitter advantage. Not a lot of schools shared their admit percents for kids who submitted scores versus kids who didn't submit scores. And so we've gathered data for 2 years, pandemic years, to look at the percentage, the admit percent of test submitters versus test non-submitters. And for instance, I'm just looking at the middle of this. I'm going to look at Boston College. Their admit rate, 26% for kids who submitted scores, but 10% for kids who didn't submit scores. Now, I don't want you to think that there's cause and effect here, that, if I submit scores, I'm more likely to get in. That's not what I'm saying. Kids who submit scores tend to be kids who are more into their academics. Kids with high test scores tend, on the most part, to be kids with higher grades, with stronger curriculums, with greater commitment to extracurriculars. And so they just tend to be stronger students and more admissible. Okay. So I like to think of test optional as really test preferred in practice. And if I look now at the kids who are seniors at some of our nation's more selective colleges, ranging from Yale to, let's say, an Emory and a University of Pittsburgh, these are all selective. Selective basically means that you're not admitting everyone, but then highly selective. The kids who are currently seniors who applied during the pandemic, when there were many more test optional colleges than there are today, the percentage of those kids who submitted scores is ridiculously high. Look at that. You would expect, okay, at an Ivy, almost everyone's going to be, brilliant and submit scores. But when we go down to look at University of Illinois, University of Pittsburgh, University of Virginia, some flagship state schools, we're still seeing that the overwhelming majority of students early in the pandemic still submitted scores. Also, the mid 50%, as I mentioned before, of test scores of admitted students went up. And specifically, I'm going to pull out Colgate and Tulane because they had the greatest gains Let's say Colgate going from a roughly a 1370, 1380 up to an almost 1500, or Tulane going from just over a 1400 to almost, a 1500. Those are enormous, gains in mid 50% in just 5 years. Not quite as much at the Ivies, only because the Ivies are already starting very, very high. So University of Pennsylvania went from a 1500 to, a 1550. But that's still, even though it's only 50 points, it's 50 points at the highest possible level. So that is still considered, quite a gain. And I don't want you to think that it was just at the nation's most selective colleges that these mid 50% or the median scores, increased. If we're looking at still selective colleges, but, sort of a little bit of a lower tier, we're seeing, again, some gains, in the median scores, which is why we look and say, today's colleges are much, much harder to get into because their mid 50% scores are ridiculously high. But again, they've been artificially inflated. And we are hoping that with more and more colleges, making a decision to go back to requiring tests, maybe some of those scores are going to come down a bit, hopefully a bit. So, we think that there is sort of a testing revival going on. These are all colleges that went test optional in the very, beginning of the pandemic. And they have all come back to say, yes, we definitely want test scores. And so there is definitely this belief that more and more colleges are going to be going back to requiring scores. And in fact, just last week, Princeton said we are going to be requiring scores because in analyzing our data, we have found that our students who we admitted who submitted scores did far better, here at Princeton than the students we admitted without scores. Now they're giving kids time to get used to it. So it's not going to be this year or next year, but we already know for the following year. And Vanderbilt, announced that a while ago that it's going to affect the kids not this year, but next year. So yes, there definitely is a revival in testing. And those of you who are listening that are younger students, please don't even think about test optional. Just think about SAT, ACT is just a required part of applying to college. So it's a very small percentage of colleges that are on the Common App. There's 1,100 colleges that take the Common App for application, and only 5% of them do require testing scores. Yet, the number of kids who submitted scores through the Common App was up 12% this past year, and the non-submitters were down by 1%. So kids are continuing to submit their scores, and we're also starting to wonder perhaps there's a new trend coming. Caltech is the first university that I'm aware of that is requiring you to submit your AP scores if you took them. Typically, we are telling our students that to submit your AP scores if they are good. So what does that mean? If I'm applying to a highly selective university, let's just say a university that accepts, less than 10 or 15% of its students, and my whole team of educational consultants, we're telling our students to submit your AP scores only if they are 4s and 5s. If you are applying to less selective schools, the University of Florida, and don't get me wrong, University of Florida is highly selective, but it's not quite as low as, only, 15%. It's more like 20-ish%. We're telling students that if you are applying to slightly less selective schools, it's fine to submit your 3s, 4s, and 5s. Don't submit your 1s and 2s. And it would be, comparable for an IB score. But Caltech is requiring all your AP scores. Whether other colleges will say, hey, me too, I'm just like Caltech, we don't know yet because this only just happened this year. Let me just stop for a moment to find out whether there are, any questions that have come up on academics and test scores.
No questions.
And if you, do have questions, feel free to type them, and I'll be taking, a few breaks in the rest of the presentation to answer your questions. So what comes next? Your extracurriculars. And I would say more than anything else, colleges are looking for your leadership, and you're taking the initiative to start something, not necessarily joining something, but starting something, growing it, having an impact on, other people. And if you happen to have a pretty unique talent, it's definitely worth sharing with colleges. So colleges don't want to see, oh, I, did 1 year of this club and another year of this club and another year of this club, or 1 year of a sport, 1 year of another sport. They're basically looking for fewer activities with greater depth of commitment. And they do like to see commitment over a 4-year period. And that's very much a part of the application, because you'll be asked for, your most important activities and the grades in which you did them. And they only do care about high school, although we actually work with our students to find a way that if there's something you did in middle school that continued through high school, that there is a way to be able to indicate that this is an even longer term commitment. And when I say leadership, yes, you could have an elected role. You could be, say the vice president, or you could be even just say a committee chair, or it's not necessarily elected, but that you are, taking control of running some particular like event within a club. You're not necessarily an elected officer, but you're a leader, because you're going to have a resume. Yes, many colleges ask for a resume. It's optional, but optional in the world of college admissions, 99% of the time means required. So within my resume, I'm going to be able to say that I organized, I started, I led, I promoted. I mean, things that show, strong leadership. The initiative in entrepreneurship, again, is starting something. It could be a whole new organization, or perhaps I have a student who, during his term as student government president, he led the fight, and it was a fight, to put in a new student lounge in the school. And so that took a lot of initiative. So his resume started off with, that was one of the details of his resume. They also like to see collaboration. Doing something alone, no matter how good it is, maybe okay for one activity, but there needs to be some activities that show that you work well in a group. And almost all of your activities should be showing some kind of impact on other people, whether it's the other people in your club, or perhaps the people you're impacting through community service. And perhaps one of the most important is fit to major. And that's no different than your academics. If I decide that I want to apply as an education major, that I want to be a teacher, because it can be easier, less competitive to get into, let's say, teaching, the School of Education, then into the School of Business, then into the School of Engineering. And by the way, you can change majors along the way. But if I'm applying as an education major, my application really needs to support that. So I probably need to have been a camp counselor, perhaps a babysitter. Maybe I've been involved in tutoring. But if I don't have those things, then I'm not a fit for a major. And they know that I'm just, again, trying to game the system. So at least one of your activities should be related to what your eventual major is going to be. And keep in mind that listing, a dozen clubs on your application will hurt you more than will help you. Only list 2 or 3 clubs, but have greater depth of commitment, because your resume will have much more to say about those clubs. So these are I just randomly put together, an alphabetical list of just some good extracurricular activities. And by the way, if you have family responsibilities, that counts. And Common App actually have specific questions now asking about, family, the time that you need to spend, with your family. And if you're, and I don't mean with your family, but things that you need, that you're doing, for your family, driving a sibling to and from school, cooking dinner, things like that, because not everyone has time to do all the extracurriculars. But your extracurriculars will be even more important if you're applying test optional, because remember, if I take test scores away as something a college is going to consider about a student, then everything else is going to matter more. And again, just repeating it, fit to major. Make sure that there's one or maybe two activities that work well with your major. Let me give you another example. Let's say that I want to be a business major. So of course, if I have work experience or an unpaid internship, that's great. If I've done a summer program on a college campus that was related to business, some kind of learning about entrepreneurship, for example, that again is an activity that's fit to major. But how about if I am in a club and I am the secretary of the club, but I'm involved in organizing many activities? So that's going to show leadership, and it's going to show collaboration, some initiative as well. Those are all skills of a business person. So that's going to count as, fit to major. Okay. So your resume, I mentioned that resume is important. About a third of all colleges will ask you for a resume upload. It's optional. And this is on Common App that I'm talking about. And one of your downloads does have the full list of all of the colleges that last year, we haven't finished compiling the list yet for this year. But and that doesn't change much from year to year. But anyway, it's a list of all those colleges that are asking you for a resume. I am showing you just examples more for formatting than anything else of, resumes that we've done with students many years ago, with names changed and a few little details changed here and there, so no one is recognizable. But that resume, just like your personal statement and your other essays, are going to actually make you come alive. You're not just going to be, print on a piece of paper or, on a computer. You'll be able to emphasize truly how committed you are, not just that I've done this in my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years, but showing progression, perhaps getting up to a leadership role, and the different things that you've accomplished as a result of being in that extracurricular. And you may ask, well, why are colleges so keen on extracurriculars? Because it's going to show a college how you're likely to impact the community on that campus. And they don't want couch potatoes. Not only do they want active, engaged learners, but they want kids who are engaged in campus life outside of the classroom. And if you haven't been engaged in high school, they're going to assume you're not going to be very engaged in college. So that's why it's so important. And by the way, once you have a resume, you're going to find that when you complete the Common App, when you're applying to college, that there's a page in there called the questions page. It's the hardest page to fill out on Common App. But if you have, not called the questions page, called the activities page, giving you the opportunity to detail 10 activities that you've done, how you've done them, why you've done them, when you've done them, what your time commitment was. But they only give you 150 characters, not words, characters, and spaces and punctuation count as well. But they're only giving you 150 characters to describe your commitment and what you achieved. But if you have a resume, it becomes much easier to take portions of that resume and convert it into 150 character descriptions. And by the way, if you upload your resume, there is no guarantee someone's going to read all of it. They're really going to be just sort of browsing through it, which means that your activity page has to stand out. So this is just a partial list of colleges on the Common App that ask for a resume upload. But colleges don't necessarily ask for it on the Common App itself. It could be asked for in the portal. When you apply to FSU, you can upload your resume through the portal. You can also do it on through Common App. If you apply to Georgetown, which is one of the only, I'd say, very popular colleges that's not on the Common App, they require a resume. MIT also is not on the Common App, and the schools within the University System of California are not on the Common App. But almost any other school you can name is, roughly 1,100 schools. So this is that resume that was a couple of screens back, just a larger version. I'm not meant for you to necessarily read all the details, but just to see how it's arranged. The crimson color that's used is the exact crimson of Harvard, because when you upload a resume, you're uploading it for an individual college. And so you can use a college's colors. And by the way, this is a student who did wind up, at Harvard. But even without reading, you know that this is about medicine. This is a kid who was pre-med, because you can see the DNA as one of the graphics. And yes, it is fine to have graphics on your resume because you're a teenager. You're not an adult looking for a job. So this is another resume of a student who went to a highly selective university, who was a debater and broke a cardinal rule of resumes, which is, you're not supposed to ever write in sentences. But at the top, it was important, and we both agreed that he should write about his passion for forensics, because it was the major part of what he did extracurricularly. Completely different format. This one was actually done, in Canva, and it's the exact colors, again, of the school to which the student was applying. But, all three of these have eye appeal, and it's going to make someone want to read it. This is not the format you would use if you're out looking for a job, but it gets you started in creating and maintaining a resume so that when you get to college, you can reformat it more seriously, put in the more important things that are going to be related to going out and getting a job, an internship, a research opportunity. So it's a great idea to start a resume when you're applying to college. Any questions coming, Jay? Sorry, my son Jason is helping me. I couldn't do this without him, quite frankly.
No.
Okay, no questions yet. So the next part, this is usually the part that most kids dread unless a student loves to write, and I mean write creatively about herself, because writing about yourself is the hardest thing to do. So there's a personal statement. Your Common App gives you 7 choices of something to write about. It does not matter which choice you pick. In fact, one of the choices is pick a topic of your choice. However, it means a topic of your choice that's about you. Okay, it just can't be like a paper that you just wrote, for history class. You've got to grab that reader's attention. You want that reader to remember your essay, and whether you make that reader laugh or cry. I have a student who just wrote a great essay and actually told a couple of short jokes in it, and they were very much a part of that essay. I laughed like crazy as I read it. I knew I would always remember it. And another student who was talking to his father dying in the hospital and sharing thoughts with his father that he had not shared before the father got sick. I still remember that essay. I still cry when I think about it. I certainly cried when I read it. These are kids whose essays are going to help them get in. So you've got to engage the reader. You've got to be telling a story. You have to analyze that story. You have to come to some, conclusion, some impact. It's like, okay, how did the story you're telling, how did that impact you? How did it change you? How did it impact your vision of your future, your relationship with someone else? But it is written in a very conversational style. This is not the 5-paragraph essay that you were taught to write in school. Okay, it's creative writing. And of course, the big question comes up all the time. Okay, can I use AI in my my essay, or how much AI can I actually use in the essay? So the overwhelming answer, first of all, is you can't use AI to write your essay. And honestly, my staff and I can always tell when we get an essay that's been written by AI, because we just know it doesn't sound like the student. It's not your own work. It's like turning in someone else's work, and it's cheating, it's fraud. And many universities today are using AI detection tools. And by the way, one of the problems with that is that these tools are not always accurate. They are giving false positives. So you really need to be very careful in terms of whatever use of AI you might decide to make. And are there times when it's okay to use AI? I say yes. I can think of one really great example of using AI. What if I feed my resume, which I wrote on my own? I didn't use AI to write my resume, but I fed a couple of my activities into one of the AIs that I use, and I asked it to just suggest which might make the best topic for me to write an essay about and why. I'm not asking it to write my essay. I'm just asking it to help me pick a topic. And giving it my resume is giving it lots of information about me. Or perhaps I'm going to open my junk drawer in my room, and I'm going to go into AI and say, come up with a good resume topic for me. I'm sorry, a good essay topic for me based on the things that are in my junk drawer that are very memorable to me. And the things that I've just found in my junk drawer, and I'm looking down, or a roll of black tape, a scissors, a pen. I mean, hopefully I have more interesting things than this. Oh, I definitely have stickers from Slumo Institute, my daughter's slime business. So I could put that and into an AI and ask it to come up with a couple of topics for me to think about to write an essay. I could ask AI to generate an outline, but I've got to give it some details. I've got to explain to it why some of these things are, important to me, or what I do with it. So I'm going to might ask it just to help me generate an outline. The other thing you can do at the end is you can certainly ask AI to check your grammar, or you can use Grammarly to do that. If you were to use AI for anything more than this, you will probably lose your voice in it, and colleges will know that it was written by AI. However, there are some colleges that explicitly forbid you to use AI in your application at all, anywhere. They absolutely say there's no AI anywhere. And others are very unclear about how you can or can't use, AI. They just tell you to use it perhaps carefully, or don't mention it at all. So I'd say just beware. Any questions about essay?
No.
Okay. So the next thing is recommendations. I'll start by telling you that the state universities in Florida do not require recommendations. They might for an honors program, but generally for the application, there's no recommendation. So it's not like I can have my English or my math teacher send a recommendation to FSU or University of Florida. They're just not even going to read it if they get it. But most colleges do require at least one teacher recommendation. They almost all require a counselor recommendation, although our state universities do not. And often they will allow you to do 2 teacher recommendations. There are some colleges that will accept more than 2. I think if you send anything more than 3, it's like begging for a spot, and I would never do that. And it always comes up, who should I ask? So for those of you who are listening to this who are juniors or younger, so juniors especially, please pick 2 teachers to make your best friends. These are teachers whose extra help you should seek. If you don't understand something in class, or you just want to learn more. There are classes where your hands should be up. You should be volunteering with answers. You should be going to the board. You should be leading discussions, because you want to pick 2 core academic teachers, one of which must be related to your major. And by the way, for those of you who are applying undecided, it's a little harder to do because there's clearly not, a subject that is related to your major. But if I'm applying as anything in STEM, I definitely want a STEM teacher to write my recommendations. I'm looking for 2 teachers that are teaching core academic subjects junior year. If I'm applying as a business major, you are much better off getting a math teacher to write a recommendation than you are, let's say, a business management teacher. Although next year there is actually going to be an AP course on in business, and so perhaps that will likely be considered a core subject because it's AP. And so that could be for future students, a teacher to go ask for a recommendation. There's also going to be a new computer science course added next year in AI. So besides the 2 computer science courses that currently exist and are considered core, although they don't fall into the category of English, math, science, social science, or foreign language, it's still considered core. There will be one more in AI for those of you who are really interested in getting into greater depth with computer science. Keep in mind that English and history teachers tend to write the best. Foreign language teachers, unless you plan to major in the foreign language, generally don't write as well because most of them are not, or I shouldn't say most, many of them are not native English speakers, so the writing may not be as strong. So if a school says it allows for 1, but gives you an option of 1 more, I would definitely take advantage of that and send 2. If it asks for 1, but gives you the option of 2 more, it's up to you if you want to send 2 more or not. Many colleges also allow for an outside recommendation. Someone who has been, let's say, your coach. It could be the debate coach. It could be your soccer coach. It could be your private music or art teacher. In other words, it's not someone who you have in school as a teacher. It's someone who does something else. Oh, perhaps it's your manager at work or your supervisor at a community service program or a graduate student that you did a research project with over the summer. So I would take advantage of an opportunity to add an additional recommendation for those colleges that allow it. It's also very important to ask for your recommendations early. Do not wait for your senior year to ask for them. Certain teachers have a reputation for writing fabulous recommendations, but they get booked up early. Towards the end of your junior year, perhaps 2 weeks before final exams, that would be an ideal time to ask a junior teacher if he or she would write you a recommendation for the following year. And if they say yes, you can actually send what I'll call a love letter. It's really an email that would highlight some things that were very important to you in their class and why you asked them to write the recommendation. What you're really doing is saying, hey, could you please include this, this, and this in your recommendation about me? Teachers sometimes forget, like, what did you write a paper on? What did you do a lab project on that was particularly impressive? So you can actually send some reminders. You also need a counselor recommendation, and you could send, or your parents, either one could send some thoughts to that person, thanking them in advance for writing your recommendation, but perhaps sharing a few things about you that that counselor might not know, because especially if you're in a larger public school, your counselor might not know you that well yet. And your recommendations can't just say, well, Judi is like a great student. It can't even say Judi is the student I've been waiting my 30-year career for. It needs to go into detail about why Judi was the best student, in the class. Okay. Demonstrated interest. This is something colleges sometimes deny as being important, and I would say it's not as important to a very large state university that would have trouble tracking demonstrated interest for so many people. And it is not quite as important to the most selective colleges in the country, those with, let's say, under an 8 or 10%, admit rate, because they know that everybody really wants to go to them. But for those in between, so how do you demonstrate your interest? Of course, the best way is to visit, to make a connection with the person leading the information session, to get the business card of that person, and also of, say, let's say you're from Florida, from the Florida rep, to send a thank you note, to make contact with that person. But let's say that you can't visit, you can do an online visit. Perhaps one of the only good things that came out of the pandemic was that colleges had much more robust offerings on their website for you to learn more about them. So that many of them have kept up the fact that could be live information sessions, live campus visits, or recorded ones. Because once you've done one of those and you've gained insight into the college, you can call, find out who the rep is for your geographic area, send an email telling them how much you enjoyed a particular presentation that you saw about them online, what you liked about it in particular, maybe have a question or two that you can't answer easily on their website, and start a relationship with that person. Because chances are that the admission rep for, let's say you live in Palm Beach County, the Palm Beach County admission rep is likely to be the first person to read your application and decide, do you go in the good pile or do you go in the bad pile? So it's good to have a connection when you can. And by the way, the admission reps who are visiting your high schools now, these are people who are typically the first line of making admission decisions, who will read your application. Come to the presentation from a school. Let's say you're interested in Carnegie Mellon and they're coming next Tuesday to your school. Make arrangements to go. Sit as close to the person who's going to be speaking as possible. If your school doesn't have a dress code, wear Carnegie Mellon colors if you can. Ask a couple of good questions. Make eye contact with that person. Shake that person's hand afterwards. Get her business card and give her yours. And yes, as a high school student, you can create your own business cards. Part of a session I often do with students is to give them an insight into how you can make a business card that reflects who you are. You don't have to wait until you have a job to have a business card. So any way that you can demonstrate your interest and make a connection with the colleges that are really high up on your list can improve your chances. And there's definitely been research showing that students who have physically visited and have been admitted have a much higher percentage of those students actually enroll at that school than those who didn't visit. So that's why colleges like kids who have demonstrated interest. Jay, any questions yet?
Is a work reference useful?
Great question. Is a work reference useful? The answer is yes, because a work reference can show a whole different side of you. Your personality, your ability to learn quickly, your ability to interact on a professional level and, have good communication skills, the impact that you have had on the people that you're doing the work with or for. It can be really good. And especially if you happen to have a job or an internship that is, if it's related to your potential major, it will have even more impact. But even if it's not, to be able to show how you adapt in an out of school adult environment. Okay. So your intellectual vitality, and I would say this is really only important at the most selective schools. They're definitely looking for you to be like challenging yourself academically with the AP or IB courses, especially in an area of interest to you. But extracurricularly, perhaps it's your involvement in debate, which is a very cerebral type of activity, or you're doing research or being in a science fair, or perhaps you want to be an English major and you've been involved in a poetry slam, or what your teachers say about you, and being able to talk about your intellectual curiosity in and out of the classroom in a teacher recommendation is vital at the highest level of admission, which is why you should be going in to ask your teachers either, as I said, for extra help on something you don't understand, or how to dig deeper and learn even more about a particular subject, or just go in to just talk in general about what you learned in class that week and how it has inspired you. So it's definitely your extracurricular and your teacher recommendations that will add sort of a little bit of icing on the cake to show how involved you are in the world, in life, in things that will make a difference on a college campus. Your demographics and personal characteristics. Okay, so first of all, colleges today, since they're not allowed to make admission decisions any longer, giving, let's say, racial preferences based on Supreme Court decision of about 2 years ago. What they tend to be looking for more now, they like to brag about how many rural students they've admitted, how many first-gen students, and by first-gen, depending upon the college, it could either mean, if you're first generation, that neither mom nor dad went to college, or it could mean that neither mom nor dad graduated from college and earned, a bachelor's degree. Different colleges have different definitions, but colleges definitely like to brag about how many first-gen students they have, in addition to how many rural first-gen, how many rural students, how many first-gen students. If you have both, that can really help. Also, how many, what they will call, let's say, Pell eligible or very low income students, or they have accepted. So think about the advantage if you're low income, first-gen, and rural. You have many advantages. But beyond that, their expectations are higher if you're coming from what's considered to be a wealthy zip code. If you're in Beverly Hills, if you're in the 33496 section of Boca Raton, they will expect more of you, knowing that you're coming from a more well-heeled family. How did you take advantage of the opportunities that you had? Okay. Are you a generous person? Are you a collaborative person? They're going to tell that from your extracurricular activities. I have one student who was exceptionally strong. He was in computer science. He had developed a significant amount of software, had lots of great stuff in his resume, but almost everything he did was single-handedly. There was virtually no collaboration. It hurt him tremendously in college admission because he didn't have that collaborative gene, if you will. No. And unfortunately, your ability to pay can also make a big difference, fortunately or unfortunately. If you are on a waiting list, because at the end, when colleges make their very final decisions, not in the early round, but their final decisions, you can be admitted, you can be denied, you can be put on a waiting list. Kids who come from full pay families who don't need financial aid maybe for some colleges more likely to get off that waiting list because they don't need any money. But again, it can work in the other direction, that if you have zero ability to pay, but you've made the best of your situation, you've really achieved academically and extracurricularly, that may also be, an advantage. So ability to pay can work in either direction, but much more likely to work getting you admitted, or especially getting you admitted off the wait list, if you have demonstrated ample ability to pay. And how do you demonstrate that? They do ask what degrees your parents have. They do know what zip code you live in. They can look up zip codes and see what the average income is, in that zip code. And if mom is a physician and dad is a partner in a well-known law firm, they know that there is a high ability to pay. Okay. And an unspoken key in college admission is be a kind person. And I sincerely mean that. If it shows through in your recommendations, in your extracurriculars, your kindness, that is going to play a key role in getting you admitted. So one quick little case study. This was in the newspapers a couple of years ago. A really top California student, unweighted GPA 3.97. There must have been an A- in one course at some point. almost a perfect SAT, was an entrepreneur. He did his own startup business as a sophomore. He was a very, very engaged student, and he applied to a lot of top tier schools. Think about where he might have gotten in. Keep that in the back of your mind. And he was rejected at all but 2 of them. And I think part of the reason is that he was not very collaborative. He was also a little too sure of himself, a little too much bragging in his application. Now, can you guess where he wound up, though? He did not wind up at University of Maryland. He did not wind up in University of Texas. And by the way, those are both very, very, very hard for an out-of-state student to get into. But he wound up with a job at Google. So you can never tell what's going to happen. And then there are some other reasons you get into college that you will never know specifically what it was. And this is truly about the black box. There is an incredibly well-known education author and journalist by the name of Jeff Solingo. In fact, I have his newest book. I'm in the middle of reading it. I don't know if you could see it clearly or not. No skin off my back. I get nothing out of it, but it's really, really interesting and talks a lot about why prestige should not be what you're looking for in college admission. But anyway, he wrote something about the shaping of an incoming class, and that the academic standards, everything we've been talking about, gives way to something more ambiguous, that you have no clue what is going on. Like, is this college looking for more tuba players? Is it looking for more Latin majors? These are what are called institutional priorities. And what happens perhaps in the week or so before admission decisions are going to be, well, they're no longer really mailed out. They are posted much more likely to your application portal, which you'll find out about your portals once you submit applications. You'll get an email back from each college telling you how to check on the status of your application and whether something is missing or not. But they may look and say, well, first of all, based on all the kids that we have accepted and how much financial aid we're likely to give, if 40% of them said yes to us, because typically we know from previous years that our yield is that 40% will say yes, we're not going to have enough money to give out for financial aid. So we need to remove the highest need 25 students who we have accepted and replace them with 25 other students with 0 need, with, let's say, who come from the same state and have the same major, which may be how somebody got in that you thought, I wonder how she got in. Okay. Or they may say, we definitely need more tuba players, more Latin majors, or the mayor of a particular city is the best friend of the president of the university and called and said, I have 5 kids from my town that you must admit. So there are things that happen at the very last minute. Think about this. You're planning, a big wedding or a huge party, and you look at your final list and you recognize, I really don't want to invite this person, or this person, or this person. I'm going to go very, very over budget. I better take them out. Oh, and I forgot to add Aunt Tilly and Uncle Charlie or whatever it may be. And so when you've got your invitation list, you're going to make last minute changes. That's what colleges are doing. Sometime, let's say in March, before the final admission decisions go out, they are reshaping the class. And so sometimes the student gets in or doesn't get in for a reason that would have no explanation whatsoever. Before I go on to sort of the next section, see if there's any other questions that have come up.
Nope.
Okay. So the pandemic years, and again, that I keep stressing it because it has such a major impact on the heightened selectivity and the heightened craze about college admissions. But 30 years ago, the lowest admit rate for any college was about 12%. And today it's down to 3%. Can you imagine that 97 out of 100 students who apply to a particular college and who are all probably very, very capable don't get in? And bringing this even closer to home, look back at University of Florida, and a few years after I moved here to Florida from the Northeast, more than 2/3 of the kids got into University of Florida. Yes, it was competitive, but it wasn't that competitive. Today, it's just under 20%. So what has happened here in my own home state has changed dramatically. And looking at Common App over the pandemic years and the number of students who applied, and remember, kids were more and more apt to apply to college because they said, oh, we don't need scores, we could go to college. So it went up just 30% since the beginning of the pandemic in terms of the number of students who applied. And in terms of, look at the number of applications that they filed, more than 10 million applications last year. And that went up 55% since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's not only more students, but more students are each applying to more colleges, making everything so much more competitive. And if I look at some competitive colleges, not just the Ivies, and look at their admission rates each year in a year by year, you can see that with the exception of Harvard, which sort of stayed even, and if you look really, really closely, Harvard admitted slightly more students this year, a higher percentage anyway, than it did last year. But for virtually everyone else, the admit rates, are coming down, being harder and harder and harder to get into. And I did promise you some admission rates. So these are our admission rates for 2025. The screen you might want to take a picture of to show you from, and these are all selective colleges, but from those that admit, under 6%, crazy, right? To under 12%, to under 15%. And some of the parents who are listening to this may look at some of these schools and say, oh my God, Boston University. When I went to high school and I applied to Boston University, or even more, also in Boston, look at Northeastern and the admit rate of under 6%. When I applied there, it's like, oh my God, more than 50% of the students got in. Look how things have changed. Because I think the hardest thing is that parents really don't have that much of an idea of how competitive things have gotten. And I'll just do one more, admit rates under 20%. And again, it's another picture that you may want to take a picture of. And when we look at something like, say, University of Michigan or University of Virginia, those are overall admit rates. They're not taking into account early action, for example, at either of them. They're also not taking into account in-state admit rate versus out-of-state admit rate. And for almost every state university, you're going to find that the in-state admit rate not only is significantly higher, but the number of students coming in that way in-state in almost every state university is going to be significantly more. And then the number of students coming in from out of state will be much less, and it'll be at a much lower admit rate. So just because I look at UVA and say it's almost 17%, doesn't mean, okay, it'll be a little over 17% for the out-of-staters. It might be a lot over 17%. Let's talk about another way to help improve your chances of admission, because I think we've talked a lot about, the test scores, the academics, the extracurriculars, but let's talk about the early bird. And for those of you who have younger students, freshmen or sophomores, this will be even more important for you because it will give you much more time to learn about and visit multiple colleges and figure out if you're going to be applying early action or early decision. And for those of you who may not know the difference, early action, early decision have deadline dates either today, October 15th, I think that's today, and November 1st. Those are the two dates that are most commonly used. If you apply early action, early decision, you're applying earlier because typical deadline dates are in the beginning of January or later. But you're also going to find out early In most cases, you're going to find out before Christmas, possibly even before Hanukkah. Um, and it does improve your chances to apply early, as you can see. However, early decision means if I get in early, I must go. I don't have a choice. I'm making a commitment, and therefore I can only apply to one college early decision. Okay. Early action, and Harvard, Yale, MIT have a special kind of early action called restricted early action. But early action essentially means if you get in, you're not obligated to go. You don't have to go there. And if a school has early action but not restricted early action, you can apply to multiple early action schools. So it's possible for me to apply, let's say, early decision to Penn, but at the same time, I can apply early action, let's say to Tulane, to Northeastern, to the University of Miami, to SMU, to TCU, to High Point. I mean, there's lots of places I can apply early action. But look at the admit rates for early versus regular. And these are current. MIT is the only one that's a little close. And let's look at some schools that are less selective, but still highly, highly selective. The only difference is going to be Georgetown. It's the only one that doesn't necessarily fit because the early rate isn't necessarily much higher than the regular rate. And USC, which only started early action, I believe, a year or two ago, also sort of falls out of that mold. Although USC this year has added early decision, but only for the Marshall School of Business. So again, you can see the early action, early decision. And in most cases, if you're doing early action, you can apply to as many early actions as you want and one early decision. And just to complicate things, there are some colleges that have 2 rounds of early decision, like Emory and Vanderbilt. So if I love them both and I can't decide between the 2 of them, I might say, okay, Vanderbilt's harder to get into than Emory. I love them both equally. I'm going to apply Vanderbilt ED 1. If I don't get in, let's say I can get denied. Now I know I'm done. I can get deferred, which means they're going to consider me later, but I'm no longer bound to their early. But I now can do an ED2 because I find out about ED1 in December, and ED2 deadlines are in January. So I could do ED1 Vanderbilt and ED2 Emory and have 2 schools where I'm improving my chances. Just another strategy. And there are some schools where you basically have triple the chance of getting in early if you do ED, triple the chance if you look at the admit rate for regular versus early decision. I mean, some of these, they're 3 times greater. Middlebury, Dartmouth, Brown. So you can see it's a huge difference. But if you're looking at the Ivies, of course, if you go early to one, it means you're not going early to the others. None of them have a second round, and you can't do 2 of them. So it does make it harder to get into all of the others. So I often laugh when students come to me, and it's more parents than students, who will say, oh, well, she's applying to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell, Dartmouth, and she's applying to all the Ivies. I said, oh my God, tell me why. Well, they're all Ivies, they're all prestigious. No, they're so different from each other. It's like the kid who loves Brown is going to hate Dartmouth or vice versa. So you have to understand the differences. And the only way you will is by deep research and visiting. Here's the other, either good news or bad news, depending upon which side of the coin you are on. Many colleges fill close to half their class early. And the early pool tends to be small by comparison to the regular pool of kids applying, much larger, but only roughly half the class is left for the rest of the kids. Look at this one. This is looking at 5 years worth of data for highly selective schools, not necessarily the Ivies, and how they all filled, except for UVA, roughly half their class early. And it could be through ED1 or 2. So with today's college admission landscape, here's another problem that we're seeing, is that look at the kids who are applying with an A- or a B+ average. Almost everybody has a top average. Think about when you as parents went to school. only a select group of kids have, an A minus or a B plus or better. So kids have to find more than just having straight A's or close to straight A's doesn't get you in anymore. Look at how many kids took calculus. I mean, more than a third of all kids are taking calculus. And by the way, I'd say for FSU, the average number of math classes for students, I believe, is 5. So it basically is saying that you have, I'm sorry, I think it's 5.5, but basically almost everyone has AP calculus. Some have 2 years of it. Some might only have AP statistics, but also the percentage of kids, almost 2/3 of all kids are scoring at least a 3 on their AP exams. So again, it's excelling, taking APs and IBs and, doing well is not enough. And finally, how much time kids are spending on average doing things, whether it's homework or extracurricular, and how few kids have no extracurriculars. So again, colleges are looking for the really engaged student. That's today's landscape. So, just sort of summing it up, you've got to really be, a high student to get into the schools up here, to get into the schools sort of at that next level, almost as high. And yes, I've been talking about selective. Is it easier to get into places like, let's say, and I don't mean easy, just easier to get into Elon, Syracuse, Ithaca, Rollins, High Point. Yes, it's easier, but it's still not easy. So you have to do well academically, extracurricularly, testing wise, and the earlier you can commit to meaningful extracurricular activities, the better off you are. And if you enjoyed this evening's, presentation, if you go to SCORE webinars, plural, there's lots of webinars that we've been doing, and I think an upcoming one is going to be Ellen, the one in the middle about your resume. I believe that's the next one that we have. And if you want to be sure to be on the mailing list, if you were on the mailing list for tonight, you're going to be on the mailing list for that. And there are a couple of specials that we have going on right now to just review, an essay for college admission, whether it's a personal statement or a supplement, or to review, a common app for you. Just sort of, you've attended tonight, there's a code that you can scan and take advantage of these. And of course, we hope that you think about hiring us for, individual college guidance. We also do a boot camp every summer at Suncoast, but it's not just for Suncoast students. And I'm going to see if you guys have any questions.
Would you recommend a high school senior who plans to take a gap year and hopes to use senior year to improve their grade trend to wait to apply during the fall of their gap year for senior year of high school?
Okay. So the question is, let's say that that you don't have a fabulous GPA so far for your 3 years, and that senior year you're going to be doing so much better. Do I advise, taking a gap year so that I have the full senior transcript to use all 4 years? So first of all, many colleges will use 3.5 years. So even though I always advise students to get their applications in early, even if you're not applying early action or early decision, but to get your applications in early, most colleges that don't make a decision on you during first semester will ask for your first semester grades. So if your first semester grades show a really great upward trend, that may be enough for some colleges. I would still go through the college application process, but if it turns out that that you need the whole year to really bring your GPA up, yes, it can pay, but then you should have something really great planned for your following year. Actually, some students do what's called a PG year. It's a postgraduate year at a boarding school, because I know we do boarding school counseling in addition to doing, college and graduate school. And a college will actually count what you're doing during that PG year. They may not have all your grades. They'll often have first quarter by the time you apply, but you could actually strengthen and take a number of AP courses if you wanted to, or higher level courses as a senior if you wanted to go to a boarding school for a year. Otherwise, I would suggest that you're working or you're doing some great community service. Some kids do find it hard to apply to college when they're not in high school. even though they don't have the conflicts of, say, homework, usually with everybody around you applying. So even this parent who asked the question or the student who asked the question, I would still apply to college anyway now. If you don't get in, you can always apply again next year. You could also, if you wanted to, do a semester or a year at a state college here in Florida. And some of them actually have direct links to state universities, like Tallahassee State College has a special advising program to get you into FSU by your junior year.
Are deferments for a year off a good idea to pursue a work opportunity?
Okay, so the question is, are deferments, for a year, let's say, or, taking a year off after you've applied to college and gotten in, a good idea? And the answer is yes. Most colleges allow you to defer your attendance. So if I've applied, let's say I just got into Princeton and I really want to travel for a year or work for a year, I can ask Princeton if I can take a year off, tell them what my plans are, and I don't want to guarantee it, but I can tell you that in most cases that university will say yes and let you do it. In fact, some college applications specifically ask you if you're interested in taking advantage of their gap year program and doing something in, XYZ country and then starting the following year.
Does EA at a flagship state school actually offer any advantage if the school also has ED? Example, UVA.
Okay. So the question is, does early action help you at a place like, at a state university? Let's generalize it. Does EA help you at all if a school also offers ED? The answer is yes, it does help. It probably doesn't help as much. One of the things we're going to see this year is, for the first time, University of Michigan has added an ED. So it's always had, well, as far back as I can think anyway, an EA option. And I've always had my students from Florida apply EA to Michigan who are interested in Michigan. They almost always get deferred. Some people, there's a rumor going around saying Michigan doesn't have enough time to review all the out-of-state applications, so it defers everyone. And so the admit rate for out-of-state at Michigan is pretty low, but it does help to apply EA. This year they're adding ED. We'll see what, at the end of this application cycle, we'll see if ED weakened EA. My guess is that ED is going to weaken EA, but that EA will still provide a slight advantage over applying regular. The only school where I think it doesn't pay to apply EA is Georgetown. Main reason is Georgetown generally takes sort of the very, very cream of the crop from the EA and moves virtually everyone, maybe everyone else, into the regular pool. And it's very upfront saying there's really no advantage here applying EA.
Do you have an online course?
An online course?
For college? Or for maybe the essays and application review? Okay.
So I can tell you the question that came up, and if the person who posed this question is still on, you might want to clarify it. The question is, do you have an online course? I don't have, if you're talking about college guidance, we don't have something that you can do on your own online, but many of our students are from around the world. In fact, probably half of them don't live near us here in Florida. And in fact, some of my college counselors and essay experts don't live here in Florida. And even with me living in Palm Beach County and my offices being in Palm Beach County, many of my students meet with me via Zoom because they and their parents find it very, very convenient. And we communicate a lot, with our students via email, as well. So I don't know if I've answered your question. If not, you can always email me at, Judi@jraec.com. And Judi is with an I.
And SAT or ACT?
Okay. Yes, we do provide SAT versus ACT and ACT via Zoom. Many of our tutors work with students via Zoom as well as face-to-face. It just depends upon which is more convenient and more comfortable for your students. But we do offer both. And there's a phone number at the very bottom here that's to my Boca Raton office, but they can connect you to any of our other locations here in South Florida, for test prep or college counseling. Is that it? Oops. Anyway, I just want to thank you for being part of this evening's presentation. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email me. Have a lovely evening. Good night.